Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez would silence 20 of the nation's most elite marksmen using a shooting technique they had mocked as amateur hour compensation. Her supposed handicap would become their nightmare, and her unconventional methods would rewrite everything they thought they knew about precision shooting. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying this story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The morning sun cast sharp shadows across the concrete barriers of Fort Braxton's advanced marksmanship facility, where the acrid smell of gunpowder hung perpetually in the air like incense in a cathedral of steel and precision. Elena adjusted her grip on the customized rifle stock, her calloused fingers finding the familiar grooves she'd carved herself during countless hours of modification work that most shooters would consider heretical. Her shooting station looked different from the others. Where regulation military setups featured standard iron sights and conventional accessories, Elena's workspace resembled a craftsman's laboratory. Hand-filed modifications adorned every surface of her weapon, each alteration serving a purpose that only she fully understood. The rifle's original iron sights had been replaced with a complex system of mirrors, prisms, and adjustable apertures that created multiple sight pictures simultaneously. The other instructors often joked that her setup looked like something a watchmaker had vomited onto a perfectly good rifle. They weren't entirely wrong. Elena had spent 3 years developing her alternative sighting system after a roadside bomb in Afghanistan had left her with a condition the military doctors clinically termed iron sight impairment syndrome. The blast had damaged the precise muscle control in her dominant eye, making traditional iron sight alignment nearly impossible. Most soldiers with her condition were quietly transferred to non-combat roles, their shooting careers effectively ended by a medical limitation that made standard marksmanship training useless. Elena had refused that path. Instead, she'd embarked on a solitary journey of adaptation that combined optical physics, mechanical engineering, and an obsessive understanding of ballistics that bordered on the supernatural. Her shooting notebook lay open beside her modified rifle, its pages covered with hand-drawn diagrams, mathematical formulas, and wind calculation tables that she'd developed through thousands of hours of testing. The notebook wasn't military-issued. It was a composition book she'd bought at a convenience store, its black and white cover now worn smooth from constant handling. Inside, her precise handwriting documented every variable that affected bullet trajectory, humidity coefficients, temperature adjustments, altitude compensations, even the subtle effects of barometric pressure changes on different ammunition weights. While other marksmen relied on instinct and muscle memory, Elena had created a comprehensive mathematical framework for precision shooting. Her calculations accounted for variables that most shooters never considered, turning marksmanship from an art into a science. She'd mapped the ballistic fingerprint of 17 different ammunition types, documented the performance characteristics of 12 different barrel lengths, and created correction tables for wind conditions that most instructors couldn't even identify. The morning briefing had been typical. Master Sergeant Rick Kowalski had announced the quarterly qualification scores with his usual mixture of professional pride and casual arrogance. The elite marksmen of the training battalion had posted scores that would make civilian shooters weep with envy. Precision that measured in fractions of inches at distances that reduced targets to barely visible specks. Elena's name had appeared last on the qualification list, as it always did. Not because her scores were lowest, but because her methods were so unconventional that the scoring system struggled to categorize her performance. She consistently achieved expert-level accuracy, but through techniques that violated every principle of traditional marksmanship instruction. Staff Sergeant Marcus Torres had made his usual comment about Elena's contraption shooting, suggesting that real marksmen didn't need gadgets and modifications to hit their targets. Lieutenant Sarah Chun had nodded in agreement, pointing out that combat situations required shooters who could perform with standard equipment, not customized laboratory experiments. The criticism rolled off Elena like rain on steel. She'd heard variations of the same dismissal for months. Her fellow instructors treated her alternative methods as amusing curiosities, interesting enough to watch but too unconventional to take seriously. They respected her service record and acknowledged her technical knowledge, but they considered her shooting style elaborate workaround rather than a legitimate technique. Elena understood their skepticism. Her methods looked complicated, almost ridiculous compared to the elegant simplicity of traditional iron sight shooting. Where conventional marksmen aligned two simple metal posts with their target, Elena used a system that resembled a periscope, designed by someone who'd read too many physics textbooks. Her sight picture involved multiple reference points, angular calculations, and real-time adjustments that would overwhelm most shooters. But complexity wasn't weakness when it solved problems that simplicity couldn't address. Elena's condition made traditional sight alignment impossible, but it had forced her to understand the fundamental physics of precision shooting in ways that conventional training never explored. She'd learned to read wind patterns through grass movement, to calculate bullet drop through mathematical formulas, and to predict target acquisition through systematic analysis rather than instinctive recognition. Her modified rifle was heavier than standard issue, loaded with accessories that served specific functions in her alternative shooting system. A small mirror mounted at precise angles allowed her to maintain sight alignment, despite her eye muscle limitations. Adjustable apertures created multiple sight pictures that she could select based on range and lighting conditions. Even her trigger had been modified to provide tactile feedback that helped compensate for the visual inconsistencies caused by her condition. The weapon looked ungainly to conventional marksmen, but it was perfectly adapted to Elena's needs. Every modification had been tested, refined, and proven through hundreds of hours of practice shooting. She documented the performance characteristics of each component, measured the accuracy improvements from each adjustment, and created detailed maintenance procedures for equipment that no military manual covered. Her shooting technique was equally unconventional. Where traditional marksmen relied on sight alignment and trigger control, Elena used a systematic process that combined multiple verification methods. She checked wind conditions through 3 different indicators, verified range through 2 independent measurement systems, and confirmed target acquisition through both optical and mathematical methods. The process looked slow and overly complicated to observers who were accustomed to the fluid grace of expert marksmen. Elena's pre-shot routine involved calculations, adjustments, and verifications that seemed to take forever compared to the intuitive shooting style of her colleagues. But her results were undeniable. Her shot placement was consistently accurate, her long-range performance exceeded most conventional shooters, and her ability to maintain precision under adverse conditions had earned grudging respect even from her critics. Elena packed her equipment with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else. Each component had a specific place in her equipment case, organized according to a system that prioritized protection, accessibility, and quick setup. Her modified rifle broke down into components that she could reassemble in any lighting condition, a skill she developed through countless hours of practice that her colleagues considered excessive. Tomorrow would bring another day of subtle dismissal, quiet mockery, and suggestions that she considered transferring to a role more suited to her limitations. Elena had learned to ignore the comments while focusing on the work that mattered, developing shooting techniques that could overcome physical limitations through knowledge, preparation, and technological adaptation. She didn't need their approval to know that her methods worked. The targets told the truth that opinions couldn't obscure. The instructor lounge at Fort Braxton's Marksmanship division buzzed with the kind of confident energy that came from being the best at something that mattered. Leather chairs arranged around polished tables displayed an impressive collection of shooting trophies, championship medals, and framed photographs of instructors posing with rifles at competitions across the country. The walls told the story of a unit that took pride in maintaining the highest standards of conventional marksmanship excellence. Master Sergeant Rick Kowalski held court near the coffee machine, his weathered hands gesturing as he recounted last month's inter-base competition where his shooters had dominated every category. Staff Sergeant Marcus Torres leaned against the wall, nodding along while cleaning his service pistol with the fluid motions of someone who'd performed the ritual thousands of times. Lieutenant Sarah Chun sat reviewing score sheets from the morning. Qualifications, occasionally shaking her head at numbers that didn't meet her exacting standards. The conversation naturally drifted to shooting philosophy, as it always did when elite marksmen gathered without civilians present. These were professionals who dedicated their careers to the art of precision shooting, men and women who could place bullets with surgical accuracy at distances that challenged the limits of human vision. They spoke about marksmanship the way master craftsmen discussed their trade, with reverence for tradition and suspicion of anything that seemed like a shortcut. Kowalski's voice carried the authority of someone who'd trained hundreds of shooters over 2 decades of military service. He emphasized the fundamental principles that had remained unchanged since the invention of rifled barrels: proper stance, consistent sight alignment, smooth trigger control, and natural breathing patterns. These weren't suggestions or guidelines, but immutable laws that separated expert marksmen from mediocre shooters. Torres contributed his own perspective, developed through multiple combat deployments where split-second shooting decisions had determined mission success or catastrophic failure. He stressed the importance of instinctive shooting, the ability to acquire targets and engage them through muscle memory rather than conscious thought. In combat, he argued, there was no time for calculations, adjustments, or complex procedures. Shooters needed to trust their training, their equipment, and their natural abilities. Chun approached marksmanship from a more analytical angle, having earned advanced degrees in ballistics and materials engineering before joining the military. She appreciated the science behind precision shooting, but insisted that theoretical knowledge meant nothing without the practical skills that came from thousands of hours of conventional training. Mathematical formulas and engineering principles were useful for understanding why techniques work, but they couldn't replace the fundamental skills that made shooters effective. The conversation inevitably turned to Elena's unconventional methods, as it had every few weeks since she'd joined the instructor staff. Her shooting station had become a curiosity, something that visiting officers and veteran shooters examined with the mixture of fascination and bewilderment typically reserved for museum exhibits of obsolete military equipment. Kowalski expressed his concerns about setting precedents that might encourage other shooters to abandon proven techniques in favor of experimental approaches. The military's marksmanship programs had been refined through decades of combat experience, competition success, and training innovation. Allowing instructors to develop personalized shooting systems could undermine the standardization that made military training effective and reliable. Torres was more direct in his criticism. He'd served with shooters who tried to modify their equipment or develop alternative techniques, usually with disastrous results. Combat required shooters who could perform with any weapon, under any conditions, without relying on specialized equipment that might not be available when it mattered most. Elena's elaborate modifications created dependencies that could prove fatal in real-world situations. Chun acknowledged Elena's technical knowledge and engineering skills, but questioned whether her approach represented genuine innovation or elaborate compensation for fundamental limitations. The military had established medical standards for marksmanship instructors, precisely because certain physical conditions made conventional shooting impossible. Perhaps Elena's energy would be better directed toward roles that didn't require the precise vision and muscle control that expert marksmanship demanded. The discussion revealed deeper philosophical divisions about the nature of marksmanship excellence. Traditional instructors believed that shooting was an art that required natural talent, extensive practice, and instinctive understanding of weapon dynamics. They viewed technology as a tool that should enhance human capabilities rather than replace them. Elena's approach seemed to invert this relationship, using complex modifications to compensate for biological limitations. Veteran instructors shared stories of legendary marksmen who'd achieved impossible shots through pure skill and determination. Sergeant First Class Robert Mitchell had made a confirmed kill at 847 meters, using iron sights and standard ammunition during the Battle of Fallujah. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Walsh had won the National Guard Marksmanship Championship 3 consecutive years without using any equipment modifications. These were the models that aspiring shooters should emulate, not complicated workarounds that required engineering degrees to understand. The elite marksmanship community at Fort Braxton represented the pinnacle of conventional shooting achievement. These instructors had been selected from thousands of candidates based on demonstrated excellence in traditional marksmanship disciplines. They'd proven their abilities in combat situations, competition environments, and training scenarios that tested every aspect of conventional shooting skills. Their dismissal of Elena's methods wasn't based on personal animosity or professional jealousy. They genuinely believed that her approach represented a dangerous departure from proven principles that had been validated through generations of military service. Marksmanship wasn't a theoretical exercise or engineering problem to be solved through mathematical analysis. It was a warrior skill that required courage, discipline, and the ability to perform under pressure using standard military equipment. The instructor dining facility continued these conversations during lunch breaks, where Elena often sat alone, while her colleagues debated training methodologies and shared experiences from their shooting careers. The separation wasn't deliberately cruel, but it was unmistakably present. Elena's unconventional approach had marked her as an outsider in a community that valued conformity to established excellence standards. Competition preparations revealed the extent of this cultural divide. While other instructors practiced using standard military rifles and conventional techniques, Elena spent hours adjusting her modified equipment and calculating environmental variables. Her preparation looked like laboratory work rather than warrior training, reinforcing perceptions that her methods were academic exercises rather than practical shooting skills. Range conversations often excluded Elena simply because her technical vocabulary and mathematical approach to marksmanship created communication barriers with instructors who'd learned to shoot through intuition and experience. When Elena discussed angular calculations and ballistic coefficients, conventional marksmen heard unnecessary complexity that obscured simple truths about accurate shooting. The elite marksmanship culture at Fort Braxton celebrated shooters who could achieve extraordinary results through traditional means. Elena's modified equipment and mathematical methods violated the aesthetic principles that made conventional marksmanship beautiful. Where expert marksmen demonstrated elegant simplicity, Elena's approach suggested that precision shooting required engineering solutions and technological compensation. Instructor meetings reinforced these cultural dynamics through discussions that emphasized standard procedures, conventional equipment, and proven training methodologies. Elena's contributions were acknowledged but rarely incorporated into official training programs or recommended procedures. Her alternative methods were treated as interesting anomalies rather than potential innovations worth serious consideration. The message was clear. Fort Braxton's Marksmanship Division belonged to shooters who excelled through traditional means, not to those who required specialized equipment and unconventional techniques to achieve similar results. The monthly training bulletin arrived on Elena's desk with the same bureaucratic efficiency that governed every aspect of military communication. Buried within the standard Updates about equipment maintenance schedules and personnel rotations was an announcement that made her pause mid-sip of her morning coffee. The regional Marksmanship Excellence Competition would be held at Fort Braxton. In 6 weeks, bringing together the most elite shooters from 12 military installations across the southeastern United States. Elena studied the competition parameters with the methodical attention she applied to every technical document. The event would feature long-range precision shooting at distances up to 1,200 meters, conducted on the advanced range complex that stretched across the desert terrain behind the main training facilities. What caught her attention wasn't the distance or the prestige of the competition, but the scheduled dates and the specific environmental conditions those dates would create. Her weather analysis software, a civilian meteorological program she'd purchased with her own money, painted a concerning picture of the atmospheric conditions expected during the competition window. The combination of seasonal wind patterns, humidity levels, and temperature fluctuations would create shooting conditions that standard military training rarely addressed. Most troubling was a weather phenomenon that her mathematical models predicted would occur during the precise timeframe of the competition's final rounds. Elena spent the following week diving deeper into her analysis, cross-referencing historical weather data with ballistic performance tables she developed through years of testing. The pattern was unmistakable. The competition dates coincided with atmospheric conditions that would render conventional sight adjustment techniques significantly less accurate than normal. Wind patterns would shift unpredictably due to thermal currents created by the specific terrain features of the range complex. Temperature variations would affect ammunition performance in ways that standard military ballistic tables didn't account for. Her calculations showed that shooters relying on traditional sight adjustments and conventional wind reading techniques would experience accuracy degradation of 15 to 20% during the critical afternoon shooting periods. The effect would be subtle enough that most marksmen would attribute their missed shots to normal competition pressure or minor equipment variations, never realizing that environmental factors were systematically undermining their established techniques. Elena's alternative shooting methods, developed specifically to account for complex environmental variables through mathematical compensation rather than intuitive adjustment, would actually perform better under these challenging conditions. Her modified sight system included environmental sensors and calculation aids that could adapt to the exact atmospheric conditions her models predicted. While conventional marksmen struggled with unexplained accuracy problems, her systematic approach would maintain consistent precision. The revelation created an ethical dilemma that kept Elena awake during several restless nights. She possessed knowledge that could significantly impact the competition results, potentially preventing the frustration and professional embarrassment that would result when elite marksmen found themselves missing shots they should easily make. But sharing this information would require her colleagues to acknowledge that her unconventional methods had identified problems that their traditional approach had missed. Elena decided to present her findings during the weekly instructor meeting, where training schedules and equipment needs were typically discussed. She prepared a comprehensive briefing that explained the meteorological data, demonstrated the ballistic calculations, and provided specific recommendations for sight adjustments and shooting techniques that could compensate for the predicted environmental challenges. Master Sergeant Kowalski listened to her presentation with the polite attention typically reserved for briefings about administrative updates that didn't directly affect training operations. Elena's charts and graphs covered the conference room whiteboard, displaying wind vector calculations, temperature correlation tables, and atmospheric pressure compensation formulas that looked more like engineering coursework than practical. Marksmanship guidance, Staff Sergeant Torres, interrupted her explanation of thermal current effects on bullet trajectory to point out that experienced marksmen learn to read environmental conditions through observation and instinct rather than mathematical analysis. Competition shooting required split-second decisions based on immediate sensory input, not complex calculations that would consume precious time during timed shooting events. Lieutenant Shun acknowledged Elena's research efforts but questioned whether the predicted environmental effects would actually materialize as dramatically as her model suggested. Weather forecasting remained notoriously unreliable beyond short-term predictions, and atmospheric conditions at shooting ranges often varied significantly from broader meteorological patterns due to local terrain features and microclimates that computer models couldn't accurately simulate. Kowalski expressed concern that Elena's predictions might create unnecessary anxiety among the competition team members, who were already dealing with performance pressure appropriate for a regional championship event. Elite marksmen performed best when they trusted their training and experience, rather than worrying about theoretical environmental variables that might or might not affect their shooting accuracy. The discussion revealed fundamental disagreements about the role of scientific analysis in marksmanship training. Elena's mathematical approach to environmental compensation represented a paradigm shift that challenged the intuitive methods that had proven successful for generations of military marksmen. Her colleagues weren't rejecting her analysis out of ignorance or stubbornness, but because they genuinely believed that excessive technical complexity could undermine the mental clarity and confidence that expert shooting required. Torres shared his experience from multiple combat deployments where environmental conditions had been far more challenging than anything likely to occur during a competition held at a controlled range facility. Successful combat marksmen learned to adapt to whatever conditions they encountered without relying on detailed meteorological analysis or complex calculation procedures that would be impossible to implement under battlefield stress. Chun pointed out that the competition would feature the most experienced marksmen from 12 different military installations, shooters who'd proven their abilities under diverse environmental conditions throughout their careers. These weren't novice competitors who might be significantly affected by minor atmospheric variations, but expert marksmen who'd learned to compensate for environmental factors through years of practical shooting experience. Kowalski concluded the discussion by noting that the base weather station would provide standard meteorological updates throughout the competition, allowing range officers to make any necessary adjustments to target distances or shooting schedules if conditions became unusually challenging. The military's established procedures for conducting marksmanship competitions had been refined through decades of experience and were designed to ensure fair and safe shooting conditions regardless of normal environmental variations. Elena's recommendations were noted in the meeting minutes, but not incorporated into the competition preparation plans. Her environmental analysis was filed alongside other administrative documents that might be referenced if unusual circumstances arose, but it wasn't considered essential information for the competition planning process. The dismissal was delivered with professional courtesy rather than overt criticism, but the message was unmistakable. Elena's mathematical approach to environmental prediction was considered interesting, but unnecessary for marksmen who possessed the practical experience to handle whatever conditions the competition might present. Her detailed analysis represented the kind of over-preparation that demonstrated lack of confidence in fundamental shooting skills. Walking back to her office after the meeting, Elena carried copies of her meteorological calculations and ballistic compensation tables that would now gather dust in filing cabinets. Rather than helping her colleagues prepare for the challenging conditions she knew were coming, the morning of the Regional Marksmanship Excellence Competition dawned with deceptive clarity. A crisp blue sky stretched across the desert landscape surrounding Fort Braxton, unmarred by clouds and seemingly perfect for precision shooting. The absence of visible weather disturbances created exactly the kind of false confidence that Elena's meteorological analysis had predicted would precede the afternoon's atmospheric chaos. 20-7 elite marksmen had arrived from military installations across the southeastern region, each representing the pinnacle of conventional marksmanship achievement within their respective units. Staff Sergeant Michael Harrison from Fort Gordon carried a rifle that had helped him win the Army Individual Championship 2 years running. Gunnery Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez from Camp Leon brought equipment that had proven itself in competitions from Quantico to Camp Pendleton. Technical Sergeant David Kim from Eglin Air Force Base arrived with a shooting system that had dominated inter-service competitions for the past 18 months. These weren't ordinary military marksmen, but the elite few who'd risen above thousands of competitors through demonstrated excellence in traditional shooting disciplines. Their equipment represented the finest examples of standard military precision rifles, meticulously maintained and carefully zeroed according to conventional procedures that had proven successful across decades of competitive shooting. Their techniques had been refined through countless hours of practice using methods that emphasized natural talent, instinctive target acquisition, and the elegant simplicity that defined expert marksmanship. The preliminary rounds proceeded according to schedule, with shooters engaging targets at 400 and 600 meters under conditions that seemed ideal for precision shooting. Light winds, stable temperatures, and clear visibility created an environment where experienced marksmen could demonstrate their skills without environmental interference. Scores reflected the caliber of competitors involved, with tight groupings and consistent accuracy that validated the selection process that had brought these shooters to Fort Braxton. Colonel James Mitchell, the competition director, observed the morning rounds with satisfaction that bordered on professional pride. The event was proceeding flawlessly, showcasing the marksmanship excellence that Fort Braxton had worked months to organize and coordinate. Visiting officers from participating installations expressed appreciation for the range facilities and the professional organization that made such competitions possible. Elena monitored the proceedings from her assigned position as a range safety officer, her modified rifle secured in its case while she carried standard competition equipment appropriate for her official duties. Her environmental sensors, disguised as routine meteorological instruments, recorded atmospheric data that confirmed her mathematical predictions with disturbing precision. Barometric pressure was dropping according to the schedule her models had calculated. Wind patterns were beginning to shift in ways that would soon create the thermal currents she'd identified as problematic. The 800-meter rounds began at 11:30, still within the stable atmospheric window that Elena's analysis had identified as safe for conventional shooting techniques. Competitors continued to post impressive scores, their bullets finding targets with the accuracy that separated elite marksmen from ordinary shooters. Conversations among range officers and visiting officials maintained the relaxed confidence that characterized well-organized competitions proceeding according to plan. But Elena's instruments detected the first signs of atmospheric transition that would transform the afternoon shooting conditions. Temperature differentials between the range floor and elevated terrain features were beginning to create air movement patterns that standard wind reading techniques couldn't adequately assess. Humidity levels were fluctuating in ways that would affect ammunition performance according to ballistic principles that conventional training rarely addressed. The 1,000-meter elimination rounds commenced at 1:15, precisely when Elena's calculations had predicted that environmental conditions would begin affecting shooting accuracy in ways that traditional compensation methods couldn't address. The first indication of problems came from Staff Sergeant Harrison, whose opening shot missed the target center by nearly 4 inches despite perfect sight alignment and flawless trigger control that had produced consistent accuracy throughout his morning performance. Harrison adjusted his sight settings according to conventional procedures, compensating for what appeared to be a simple windage error. His second shot missed by 6 inches in the opposite direction, suggesting environmental factors that his wind reading techniques couldn't accurately identify. The confusion in his shooting position was visible to experienced observers who recognized the frustrated bewilderment that accompanied unexplained accuracy problems. Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez experienced similar difficulties, her normally reliable shooting system producing shot placements that defied explanation according to conventional ballistic principles. Wind flags indicated relatively stable conditions, temperature seemed consistent with morning readings, and visibility remained excellent. Yet her bullets were deviating from predicted trajectories in patterns that suggested environmental influences. Beyond normal shooting variables, Technical Sergeant Kim found his carefully zeroed rifle producing groupings that expanded beyond acceptable limits, despite perfect execution of techniques that had proven successful throughout his competitive career. His shooting position looked textbook perfect, his breathing pattern remained controlled, and his trigger manipulation showed no signs of the pressure-induced errors that sometimes affected competition performance. The rifle system that had dominated recent competitions was failing to deliver the precision that had made his reputation. Colonel Mitchell conferred with range officers as reports of accuracy problems spread among competitors and coaching staff. Experienced marksmen were missing shots they should easily make, using equipment that had been thoroughly tested and proven reliable throughout preliminary rounds. The pattern suggested systematic environmental factors that weren't immediately apparent through conventional range condition assessment methods. Range meteorological instruments provided standard readings that indicated normal shooting conditions. Wind speed remained within acceptable parameters, temperature variations fell within typical ranges, and atmospheric pressure showed only minor fluctuations. Yet the mounting evidence of accuracy problems among multiple elite competitors suggested environmental influences that standard instruments weren't detecting or quantifying adequately. Master Sergeant Kowalski observed the developing crisis with growing concern that extended beyond simple competition management. These weren't novice shooters struggling with performance anxiety or equipment malfunctions, but proven marksmen using techniques and equipment that had been validated through years of successful competition and combat application. The systematic nature of the accuracy problems suggested factors that conventional marksmanship training hadn't prepared them to handle. Staff Sergeant Torres attempted to assist competitors through traditional coaching techniques, emphasizing fundamental shooting principles and conventional environmental compensation methods. His advice reflected decades of marksmanship experience and proven training methodologies, but it failed to address the complex atmospheric conditions that were systematically undermining conventional sight adjustment procedures. Lieutenant Chun analyzed the situation through her engineering background, recognizing that the accuracy problems suggested environmental variables that weren't adequately accounted for in standard ballistic calculations. Her technical knowledge provided theoretical understanding of atmospheric effects on bullet trajectory, but she lacked practical methods for compensating for conditions that conventional training procedures didn't address. The competition schedule began falling behind as shooters required additional attempts to achieve qualifying scores that should have been routine for marksmen of their caliber. The afternoon's championship rounds faced potential postponement as the morning's elimination procedures stretched beyond planned time limits due to unexplained accuracy problems that defied conventional solutions. 20 elite marksmen found themselves struggling with environmental conditions that their traditional training hadn't prepared them to handle. Using equipment and techniques that seemed inadequate for atmospheric challenges they couldn't identify or quantify. Colonel Mitchell called an emergency meeting of all range officers and competition officials as the accuracy crisis deepened beyond anything that standard military procedures had anticipated. The conference room adjacent to the range control center filled with concerned faces as reports continued arriving from shooting positions across the complex. Elite marksmen who had never failed to qualify in their careers were struggling to achieve basic accuracy standards, Using equipment and techniques that had proven reliable for decades, Elena sat in the back row of the emergency session, her competition equipment case positioned beside her chair while her environmental monitoring devices remained active in the field, continuing to record atmospheric data that validated every prediction her mathematical models had generated. The readings confirmed that conditions would deteriorate further throughout the afternoon, creating environmental challenges that would render conventional shooting techniques increasingly ineffective. Colonel Mitchell addressed the assembled officials with the gravity appropriate for a situation that threatened to compromise the integrity of the most prestigious marksmanship competition in the southeastern region. The systematic nature of the accuracy problems suggested factors beyond individual equipment malfunctions or performance anxiety. Multiple elite shooters using different rifle systems and ammunition types were experiencing similar difficulties, indicating environmental conditions that weren't adequately addressed by standard range management procedures. That Major Patricia Sanderson, the Deputy Competition Director, reported that preliminary investigations had ruled out equipment-related causes for the accuracy problems. Armorer inspections had confirmed that rifles were functioning properly, ammunition was performing within specifications, and target systems were operating according to manufacturer standards. The elimination of mechanical factors pointed toward environmental influences that standard meteorological monitoring wasn't detecting or quantifying. Master Sergeant Kowalski provided his assessment based on decades of competition management experience. The accuracy problems were unprecedented in scope and severity, affecting marksmen whose skills and equipment had been proven under diverse conditions throughout their careers. Traditional environmental compensation methods were failing to address atmospheric conditions that seemed to exceed the parameters covered by CONVENTIONL marksmanship training. Colonel Mitchell outlined the options available for addressing the crisis while maintaining the competition's integrity and ensuring fair treatment for all participants. The first option involved postponing the remaining rounds until atmospheric conditions returned to normal parameters, though meteorological forecasts suggested that might require delays of several days. The second option involved relocating the competition to backup range facilities that might offer more stable environmental conditions. The third option, which Mitchell clearly favored, involved implementing enhanced coaching support and extended time limits that would allow competitors to adapt their conventional techniques to the challenging conditions. Additional range officers would be assigned to shooting positions to provide technical assistance and environmental guidance. Based on standard military marksmanship procedures, Elena listened to the discussion with growing awareness that none of the proposed solutions addressed the fundamental problem that her analysis had identified: the atmospheric conditions creating accuracy problems weren't random disturbances that could be avoided through scheduling changes or location modifications. They were predictable phenomena that required systematic compensation through mathematical calculations and equipment modifications that conventional training didn't provide. Lieutenant Chun suggested implementing computer-assisted ballistic calculations, using software programs that could account for complex environmental variables beyond those typically considered in field shooting scenarios. Her proposal reflected sound engineering principles, but the competition rules specifically prohibited electronic assistance devices that would provide unfair advantages over conventional shooting methods. Staff Sergeant Torres recommended extending the qualification time limits and allowing unlimited sighting shots that would enable experienced marksmen to adjust their techniques through trial and error procedures. His suggestion addressed the immediate practical needs of competitors struggling with unfamiliar conditions, but it didn't provide systematic solutions for environmental challenges that would persist throughout the afternoon. Colonel Mitchell called for input from all range officers, emphasizing the need for solutions that could be implemented immediately without compromising competition. Standards are creating unfair advantages for particular shooting styles. The military's commitment to maintaining traditional marksmanship excellence required approaches that enhanced conventional techniques rather than replacing them with alternative methods. Elena felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. As the discussion continued around solutions that she knew wouldn't address the core problem, her environmental analysis provided precise understanding of the atmospheric conditions that were systematically undermining conventional shooting accuracy. Her mathematical compensation methods could account for the complex variables that traditional techniques couldn't adequately handle. Her modified equipment was specifically designed to maintain precision under the exact conditions that were causing problems for conventional marksmen, but implementing her solutions would require openly challenging the authority of senior officers, who had already dismissed her warnings as unnecessary technical complexity. It would mean violating competition protocols that prohibited non-standard equipment and unconventional shooting methods. Most significantly, it would require Elena to assume responsibility for outcomes that could affect the careers and reputations of elite marksmen who had trusted traditional methods throughout their professional lives, Colonel Mitchell announced. His decision to proceed with the enhanced coaching support option, assigning additional range officers to provide environmental guidance based on conventional wind reading techniques and standard ballistic compensation procedures. The competition would continue according to schedule, with extended time limits and unlimited sighting shots to accommodate the challenging conditions. Elena raised her hand for the first time during the meeting, her movement causing conversations to pause as attention focused on the range officer who had been notably quiet throughout the crisis discussion. Her voice carried steady confidence as she addressed Colonel Mitchell directly, knowing that her next words would irreversibly commit her to a course of action that contradicted official decisions. She informed the colonel that her environmental analysis had predicted the current atmospheric conditions with mathematical precision, and that she possessed technical solutions that could address the accuracy problems affecting elite competitors. Her methods required modifications to standard shooting procedures and the use of equipment that exceeded conventional competition parameters, but they could restore the precision that traditional techniques were failing to achieve. The conference room fell silent as Elena's statement registered among officials who had spent the morning grappling with problems they couldn't solve using established procedures. Colonel Mitchell's expression reflected the mixture of skepticism and desperate hope that accompanied unexpected offers of assistance during crisis situations. Elena continued her explanation, detailing the atmospheric phenomena that were creating systematic ballistic disturbances beyond the scope of conventional compensation methods. Her mathematical models had identified specific environmental factors that required technical solutions rather than enhanced application of traditional techniques. She could demonstrate these solutions immediately, providing empirical proof of their effectiveness under current conditions. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Colonel Mitchell's response carried the weight of command authority and institutional responsibility. The competition would proceed according to established protocols, using conventional methods enhanced by additional coaching support. Non-standard equipment and unconventional techniques were prohibited, regardless of their theoretical advantages. Range officers were expected to support official decisions, rather than proposing alternative approaches that contradicted established procedures. Elena nodded her acknowledgement of the colonel's directive while privately calculating the mathematical certainty that conventional methods would continue failing as atmospheric conditions deteriorated throughout the afternoon. 20 elite marksmen would struggle with environmental challenges that her techniques could easily overcome, their professional reputations compromised by systematic accuracy problems that traditional training couldn't address. She made her choice. In the silence that followed Colonel Mitchell's final words, Elena walked away from the emergency meeting with quiet determination, her competition equipment case feeling heavier with each step toward the storage area where she'd secured her modified rifle system. The official directive was clear: continue using conventional methods with enhanced coaching support. But her mathematical certainty about the afternoon's deteriorating atmospheric conditions made compliance impossible when she possessed the technical capability to prevent the professional embarrassment that awaited 20 elite marksmen. The equipment storage facility stood empty, except for maintenance personnel preparing backup rifles for competitors whose conventional systems were failing under environmental stress. Elena's modified rifle case occupied a corner position where she'd placed it that morning, its contents representing 3 years of systematic development work that military regulations prohibited in official competitions. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she opened the case, revealing components that looked more like precision scientific instruments than standard military shooting equipment. Her alternative sight system required 15 minutes of careful assembly, each component positioned according to specifications she'd developed through hundreds of hours of testing under diverse atmospheric conditions. The primary mirror assembly attached to mounting points that she'd machined herself, creating angular relationships that compensated for her eye muscle limitations, while providing multiple sight pictures that could adapt to complex environmental variables. The ballistic computer interface consisted of weather sensors connected to calculation modules that processed atmospheric data according to mathematical formulas Elena had derived from advanced physics textbooks and validated through extensive field testing. The system looked complicated compared to conventional iron sights, but its complexity served specific functions that standard equipment couldn't provide under the challenging conditions her analysis had predicted. Elena's preparation included checking ammunition that she'd hand-loaded according to specifications optimized for the atmospheric conditions her meteorological models had identified. Each cartridge contained powder charges calculated to compensate for air density variations, bullet weights selected for optimal stability under predicted wind conditions, and primer types chosen for consistent ignition despite temperature fluctuations that would affect conventional ammunition performance. Her shooting notebook opened to pages covered with environmental compensation tables that she'd prepared specifically for the competition's predicted conditions. Wind vector calculations, temperature correlation formulas, and humidity adjustment factors filled columns of precise handwriting that represented the mathematical framework she'd developed for maintaining accuracy when conventional techniques failed. The 1,200-meter range stretched across desert terrain that was beginning to show the thermal disturbances Elena's models had predicted would intensify throughout the afternoon. Heat mirages were forming above sandy areas between shooting positions and target locations, creating optical distortions that would affect conventional sight alignment. Air movement patterns were developing according to the thermal current predictions that her atmospheric analysis had identified as problematic for traditional wind reading techniques. Elena positioned herself at an unused shooting station located away from the main competition area, where her unconventional methods wouldn't distract officials or competitors who were struggling with environmental challenges they couldn't identify or quantify. Her setup procedure followed systematic protocols she'd developed for rapid equipment deployment under field conditions that required immediate technical solutions. The modified rifle felt balanced and familiar in her hands despite its non-standard configuration. Months of practice had created muscle memory that made her alternative shooting system feel as natural as conventional techniques felt to traditional marksmen. Her sight picture included multiple reference points that provided environmental compensation data through visual indicators that she'd learned to interpret quickly and accurately. Her first calculations incorporated real-time atmospheric readings from sensors that measured variables conventional marksmen couldn't assess through standard observation methods. Air density fluctuations, thermal gradient measurements, and humidity variations fed into mathematical formulas that generated sight adjustments precise to fractions of angular minutes that traditional techniques couldn't achieve. The target appeared through her modified sight system as a series of overlapping images that her training had taught her to interpret as specific range and environmental indicators. Where conventional marksmen saw a single sight picture that could be affected by atmospheric distortions, Elena's system provided multiple verification methods that confirmed target acquisition through different optical principles. Her breathing patterns synchronized with calculation procedures that accounted for timing factors beyond those typically considered in conventional marksmanship training. Heartbeat rhythm, atmospheric pressure variations, and thermal current cycles all influenced bullet trajectory, according to mathematical principles that her systematic approach incorporated into shooting procedures. The trigger release felt smooth and predictable despite the additional complexity of her modified firing system. Elena's grip pressure, trigger finger placement, and follow-through technique had been adapted to work with equipment modifications that required different muscle coordination than conventional shooting methods demanded. Her bullet struck the target center with precision that validated every element of her mathematical analysis and technical preparation. The environmental conditions that were causing accuracy problems for elite competitors using conventional methods had no effect on shooting techniques, specifically designed to compensate for complex atmospheric variables through systematic calculation rather than intuitive adjustment. Elena's second shot confirmed the reliability of her alternative methods under conditions that would continue deteriorating throughout the afternoon, according to her meteorological predictions. The mathematical compensation for thermal currents, humidity variations, and air density fluctuations was working exactly as her models had calculated, maintaining accuracy despite environmental challenges that conventional techniques couldn't adequately address. Meanwhile, reports from the main competition area indicated that accuracy problems were intensifying as atmospheric conditions developed. According to Elena's predicted timeline, elite marksmen were consuming additional ammunition allowances in futile attempts to adapt conventional techniques to environmental factors that traditional training hadn't prepared them to handle. Extended time limits and unlimited sighting shots were proving inadequate against systematic atmospheric disturbances that required technical solutions rather than enhanced application of conventional methods. Elena continued her systematic demonstration, each shot confirming the effectiveness of mathematical compensation methods that could maintain precision under the exact conditions that were compromising conventional shooting accuracy. Her modified equipment was performing flawlessly. Her calculation procedures were providing accurate environmental corrections, and her alternative techniques were delivering consistent results that conventional methods couldn't match. Range officers, monitoring Elena's isolated shooting position, began to notice the consistent accuracy she was achieving despite using equipment and methods that violated standard competition protocols. Her shot placement remained precise while reports from the main competition area described continuing struggles with environmental conditions that seemed to exceed the capabilities of traditional marksmanship techniques. Colonel Mitchell received updates indicating that Elena Vasquez was conducting unauthorized shooting demonstrations using non-standard equipment in violation of competition regulations and direct orders to support conventional methods. Her actions represented insubordination that required immediate disciplinary response, regardless of whatever accuracy she might be achieving through prohibited techniques. But Elena's shooting performance was creating results that couldn't be ignored by officials, desperate for solutions to environmental problems that were threatening the integrity of the most prestigious marksmanship competition in the southeastern region. Her mathematical approach was working when conventional wisdom was failing, providing empirical proof that alternative methods could overcome atmospheric challenges that Traditional techniques couldn't handle. Elena prepared for the consequences of her decision while continuing to gather evidence that her unconventional approach represented genuine innovation rather than elaborate compensation for physical limitations. Elena's systematic shooting demonstration continued with mechanical precision as the afternoon sun intensified thermal disturbances that her meteorological models had predicted would reach peak severity between 2 and 4 o'clock. Each shot placement validated the mathematical compensation methods she developed through years of solitary research, her bullets finding target centers with consistency that seemed impossible under atmospheric conditions that were systematically undermining conventional marksmanship techniques. Her modified sight system processed environmental data through calculation procedures that accounted for variables beyond the scope of traditional wind reading methods. Thermal currents rising from heated desert floor created air movement patterns that conventional marksmen couldn't detect or quantify, but Elena's sensors measured temperature differentials and calculated their ballistic effects with mathematical precision that eliminated guesswork from environmental compensation procedures. The ballistic computer interface displayed real-time atmospheric data that confirmed every prediction her preparatory analysis had generated. Air density variations were fluctuating according to thermal cycles that created systematic bullet trajectory. Disturbances, humidity levels were changing in patterns that affected ammunition performance through complex chemical interactions, and barometric pressure shifts were influencing projectile stability through aerodynamic principles that conventional training rarely addressed. Elena's ammunition performed exactly as her hand-loading specifications had calculated, each cartridge optimized for the specific atmospheric conditions that were causing accuracy problems for competitors. Using standard military rounds, her powder charges compensated for air density variations through mathematical formulas that accounted for temperature effects on burning rates. Her bullet weights provided optimal stability under predicted wind conditions, and her primer selections ensured consistent ignition despite thermal fluctuations that affected conventional ammunition reliability. Target acquisition through her alternative sight system revealed information that conventional iron sights couldn't provide under the optically distorted conditions created by thermal mirages and atmospheric turbulence. Multiple sight pictures allowed Elena to verify range estimation through independent optical methods, confirm wind direction through different angular measurements, and validate target alignment through systematic cross-checking procedures that eliminated errors caused by atmospheric distortions. Her shooting rhythm incorporated timing factors that synchronized bullet release with atmospheric cycles that conventional marksmen couldn't detect or predict. Thermal current patterns created brief windows of stability that occurred at regular intervals determined by terrain features and solar heating effects, but identifying these windows required environmental monitoring capabilities that traditional shooting techniques didn't possess. Range personnel monitoring Elena's unauthorized demonstration began documenting accuracy results that defied explanation according to conventional ballistic principles. Her shot groups measured less than 2 inches at 1,200 meters despite atmospheric conditions that were causing elite competitors to miss targets entirely using equipment and techniques that had proven reliable throughout their careers. The mathematical precision of her alternative methods was producing consistent results that seemed impossible under current environmental circumstances. Major Sanderson received reports that Staff Sergeant Vasquez was achieving perfect scores while using prohibited equipment in direct violation of competition regulations and official orders. Her insubordination represented serious disciplinary concerns, but her shooting performance was generating results that contradicted fundamental assumptions about the relationship between environmental conditions and marksmanship accuracy. Elena's demonstration expanded to include rapid target engagement procedures that tested her mathematical compensation methods under time pressure, similar to combat shooting scenarios. Her calculation procedures had been streamlined through practice, until environmental analysis required only seconds rather than minutes, allowing quick adaptation to changing atmospheric conditions without sacrificing the systematic precision that made her. Alternative techniques effective. Wind pattern changes that occurred throughout the afternoon followed thermal cycles that Elena's meteorological analysis had mapped with predictive accuracy that amazed even her own expectations. Each environmental shift registered on her sensors, according to scheduled timelines her models had calculated, allowing preemptive sight adjustments that maintained accuracy while conventional marksmen struggled to identify what was affecting their shooting performance. Master Sergeant Kowalski observed Elena's isolated shooting position through binoculars, watching her methodical procedures with growing awareness that her unconventional approach was succeeding under conditions that had defeated 20 elite marksmen using traditional techniques. Her modified equipment looked ridiculous compared to elegant conventional rifle systems, but her results were undeniably superior to anything conventional methods were achieving. Staff Sergeant Torres monitored radio communications from the main competition area, where reports of continued accuracy problems contrasted sharply with observations of Elena's consistent precision. Elite competitors were exhausting ammunition allowances without achieving qualifying scores, their professional reputations threatened by systematic failures that defied explanation according to conventional marksmanship principles. Lieutenant Shun analyzed ballistic data from multiple shooting positions, recognizing patterns that suggested environmental factors beyond the scope of standard military training procedures. Her engineering background provided theoretical understanding of atmospheric effects on projectile trajectory, but she lacked practical methods for implementing compensations that could restore accuracy under current conditions. Elena's final demonstration shots achieved perfect target placement, despite atmospheric conditions that had reached the peak severity her models had predicted. Thermal disturbances were creating optical effects that made conventional sight alignment nearly impossible. Wind patterns were shifting unpredictably due to complex thermal interactions, and humidity variations were affecting ammunition performance through mechanisms that traditional ballistic tables didn't address. Colonel Mitchell received comprehensive reports documenting Elena's shooting performance alongside updates on the continuing crisis affecting elite competitors using conventional methods. Her technical violation of competition regulations was clear and indisputable, but her results suggested capabilities that could potentially salvage the integrity of a competition that was failing due to environmental factors no one else had anticipated or prepared for. Range safety officers stationed near Elena's position confirmed that her shooting procedures maintained all safety protocols while achieving accuracy levels that exceeded anything recorded during preliminary competition rounds. Her modified equipment was functioning reliably, her ammunition was performing consistently, and her environmental compensation methods were producing results that validated theoretical ballistic principles through practical application. Elena secured her rifle and began documenting the atmospheric conditions that had validated every element of her mathematical analysis. Her environmental sensors recorded data that would provide empirical proof of the relationship between complex atmospheric variables and conventional marksmanship limitations. Information that could revolutionize military training approaches if institutional attitudes toward unconventional methods could be changed. Her demonstration had proven that mathematical compensation could overcome environmental challenges that traditional techniques couldn't handle, that systematic preparation could achieve results that instinctive shooting couldn't match, and that unconventional methods could provide solutions when conventional wisdom failed. The question now was whether military leadership would acknowledge these results or maintain commitment to traditional approaches despite their demonstrated limitations. Elena waited for the inevitable confrontation with officials who would have to decide between enforcing regulations and accepting evidence that challenged Fundamental assumptions about marksmanship excellence. Colonel Mitchell arrived at Elena's shooting position, accompanied by Major Sanderson and a cluster of range officers, whose expressions reflected the mixture of disciplinary concern and desperate curiosity that characterized their approach to a subordinate who had blatantly violated direct orders while achieving impossible results. The evidence of Elena's shooting performance lay scattered across the target retrieval area in the form of paper, targets punctured with holes that measured precision beyond anything recorded during the official competition rounds. Master Sergeant Kowalski examined Elena's target sheets with the methodical attention of someone who had spent decades evaluating marksmanship performance according to military standards that left no room for subjective interpretation. Each bullet hole was positioned within the target center with mathematical consistency that defied explanation according to conventional ballistic principles, particularly under atmospheric conditions that had caused elite competitors to miss targets entirely using equipment and techniques validated through years of successful application. The measurements were undeniable. Elena's shot groups at 1,200 meters measured 1.8 inches center to center, a level of precision that exceeded the capabilities of most conventional rifle systems under ideal environmental conditions. Under the challenging atmospheric circumstances that had plagued the official competition, her accuracy represented performance that conventional marksmanship theory suggested should be impossible without technological assistance that exceeded standard military equipment parameters. Major Sanderson studied Elena's modified rifle system with the analytical attention of someone attempting to understand technical innovations that challenged established military procurement and training protocols. The alternative sight system incorporated optical principles that she recognized from advanced physics coursework, but the practical application represented engineering solutions that military research and development programs hadn't explored despite decades of investment in conventional marksmanship enhancement projects. Staff Sergeant Torres monitored radio communications from the main competition area, where reports indicated that accuracy problems had intensified throughout the afternoon according to Elena's predicted timeline. Elite marksmen were requesting equipment inspections, ammunition changes, and target relocations in futile attempts to identify factors that might explain systematic shooting failures that defied their professional experience and technical knowledge. Lieutenant Chen analyzed atmospheric data from Elena's environmental monitoring equipment, her engineering background providing sufficient technical knowledge to understand the sophisticated meteorological analysis that had predicted current conditions with remarkable accuracy. The mathematical models displayed on Elena's calculation modules incorporated atmospheric variables that conventional weather forecasting rarely addressed, yet their predictive precision had been validated through empirical results that couldn't be disputed. Colonel Mitchell demanded explanation for Elena's unauthorized demonstration, his command authority requiring immediate response to insubordination that had occurred despite direct orders to support conventional competition procedures. Her violation of established protocols represented serious disciplinary concerns that extended beyond simple rule infractions to encompass questions about military hierarchy and the obligation of subordinates to comply with official directives regardless of personal opinions about their effectiveness. Elena responded with the same calm precision that characterized her shooting techniques, explaining that her mathematical analysis had predicted the exact atmospheric conditions that were causing accuracy problems for conventional marksmen. Her environmental monitoring equipment had confirmed these predictions throughout the afternoon, while her alternative shooting methods had proven capable of maintaining precision under circumstances that traditional techniques couldn't adequately address. Her modified rifle system wasn't experimental equipment, but the result of 3 years of systematic development work that had solved ballistic problems through mathematical compensation rather than technological enhancement. Each component served specific functions that addressed limitations in conventional iron sight shooting, particularly under environmental conditions that exceeded the parameters covered by standard military training procedures. Master Sergeant Kowalski interrupted Elena's technical explanation to point out that her shooting demonstration, regardless of its accuracy results, had been conducted in direct violation of competition regulations and official orders that specifically prohibited non-standard equipment and unconventional methods. Military discipline required compliance with established procedures rather than individual initiatives that challenged institutional authority through unauthorized technical innovations. Elena acknowledged the regulatory violations while emphasizing that her environmental analysis had identified atmospheric conditions that would systematically undermine conventional shooting accuracy throughout the afternoon. Her mathematical models had predicted the exact problems that elite competitors were experiencing, and her alternative methods had proven capable of overcoming environmental challenges that traditional techniques couldn't handle. Major Sanderson examined Elena's ballistic calculations with growing awareness that the mathematical precision of her environmental analysis exceeded anything available through standard military weather forecasting or ballistic computation programs. Her atmospheric compensation formulas incorporated variables that conventional training rarely addressed, yet their accuracy had been validated through shooting results that demonstrated practical application of theoretical ballistic principles. Range personnel continued reporting Elena's shooting performance to officials who were grappling with the implications of results that challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between equipment standardization and marksmanship effectiveness. Her modified rifle system had achieved precision that exceeded conventional military specifications, despite using components that violated established procurement and training protocols. Staff Sergeant Torres received updates from the main competition area indicating that accuracy problems had reached crisis levels that threatened the integrity of the entire event. Elite marksmen whose careers had been built on conventional shooting excellence were struggling with environmental conditions that their traditional training hadn't prepared them to handle, their professional reputations compromised by systematic failures that defied conventional explanation. Colonel Mitchell studied Elena's environmental data with reluctant recognition that her atmospheric analysis had demonstrated predictive capabilities that exceeded standard military meteorological services. Her mathematical models had identified complex environmental factors that weren't adequately addressed by conventional weather forecasting, yet their accuracy had been proven through empirical results that couldn't be dismissed as coincidental. Lieutenant Chen calculated the statistical probability that Elena's shooting accuracy could be achieved through random chance under current atmospheric conditions, her engineering analysis confirming that mathematical compensation was the only explanation for precision that exceeded conventional ballistic capabilities. The systematic nature of Elena's results suggested technical innovations that represented genuine advances in marksmanship science rather than elaborate compensations for individual limitations. Elena's documentation revealed the depth of preparation that had preceded her unauthorized demonstration, months of atmospheric analysis and ballistic testing that had identified environmental challenges conventional training didn't anticipate. Her mathematical models had predicted not only the occurrence of problematic conditions, but their specific timing and severity, information that could have prevented the accuracy crisis affecting elite competitors. Major Sanderson acknowledged that Elena's environmental predictions had proven accurate while conventional weather assessments had failed to identify atmospheric factors that were systematically affecting shooting performance. Her technical analysis had demonstrated capabilities that exceeded standard military meteorological services, raising questions about institutional approaches to environmental assessment and ballistic compensation procedures. Master Sergeant Kowalski examined Elena's modified equipment with growing understanding that her alternative methods represented systematic solutions to ballistic problems rather than individual adaptations to physical limitations. Her sight system incorporated optical principles that addressed environmental distortions, affecting conventional iron sight shooting, while her calculation procedures provided atmospheric compensation capabilities that traditional techniques couldn't match. Colonel Mitchell faced a decision that extended beyond simple disciplinary action to encompass questions about institutional flexibility and the military's capacity to recognize technical innovations that challenged established procedures while delivering superior results under challenging conditions. Colonel Mitchell's decision transformed the remainder of the competition from a showcase of conventional marksmanship excellence into an unprecedented examination of alternative shooting methodologies that challenged every assumption military training had maintained about the relationship between standardization and combat effectiveness. His directive authorized Elena to provide technical assistance to struggling competitors, using whatever methods proved necessary to salvage the integrity of an event that represented years of planning and significant investment in regional military cooperation. The announcement sent ripples of shock through the elite marksmanship community as word spread that a previously unknown instructor with unconventional equipment would be advising shooters whose careers had been built on mastery of traditional techniques. Staff Sergeant Michael Harrison, the two-time Army individual champion, found himself listening to ballistic calculations from someone he'd never heard of, her mathematical explanations challenging fundamental assumptions about environmental compensation that had guided his shooting for over a decade. Elena's first coaching session with Gunnery Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez revealed the extent to which conventional training had failed to prepare elite marksmen for atmospheric conditions that exceeded standard environmental parameters. Rodriguez's rifle system, which had dominated competitions from Quantico to Camp Pendleton, was mechanically perfect, but optically inadequate for conditions that created thermal distortions beyond the compensatory capabilities of traditional iron sight alignment. Procedures. Elena's environmental analysis provided Rodriguez with mathematical frameworks for understanding atmospheric effects that conventional wind reading techniques couldn't identify or quantify. Her calculations revealed that thermal currents were creating air movement patterns that shifted according to solar heating cycles. Humidity variations were affecting ammunition performance through chemical interactions that standard ballistic tables didn't address, and barometric pressure fluctuations were influencing projectile stability through aerodynamic principles that traditional training rarely considered. The transformation in Rodriguez's shooting performance was immediate and dramatic. Her first shots using Elena's mathematical compensation methods achieved target placement that exceeded her morning scores, despite atmospheric conditions that had caused her to miss targets entirely using conventional techniques. The systematic precision of Elena's approach restored accuracy that traditional methods couldn't maintain under complex environmental circumstances. Technical Sergeant David Kim approached Elena's coaching with the skepticism of someone whose competitive success had been built on conventional techniques that emphasized instinctive target acquisition and muscle memory developed through thousands of practice rounds. His initial resistance to mathematical shooting methods reflected cultural attitudes that viewed calculation as weakness and complexity as evidence of insufficient natural talent for marksmanship excellence. Elena's patient explanation of ballistic principles gradually overcame Kim's reluctance as her environmental predictions proved accurate and her compensation methods delivered results that his traditional techniques couldn't match. Her mathematical models explained the systematic accuracy problems he'd experienced throughout the afternoon, providing rational understanding of atmospheric factors that had seemed random and unpredictable through conventional assessment methods. Kim's conversion to Elena's systematic approach became complete when his modified shooting procedures achieved perfect scores despite environmental conditions that had defeated his conventional techniques. The mathematical precision of her methods restored confidence that had been shaken by inexplicable accuracy failures that challenged his professional identity as an elite marksman. Major Sanderson observed Elena's coaching sessions with growing recognition that her alternative methods represented fundamental advances in marksmanship, science rather than individual adaptations to physical limitations. Her ability to teach mathematical compensation techniques to elite shooters suggested systematic applications that could revolutionize military training approaches if institutional attitudes toward unconventional methods could be changed. The cultural transformation accelerated as Elena's coaching produced consistent improvements in shooting performance among competitors who had been struggling with environmental conditions throughout the afternoon. Word spread through the elite marksmanship community that the instructor with the modified rifle system possessed knowledge that could overcome atmospheric challenges that conventional training couldn't address. Range officers began incorporating Elena's environmental monitoring techniques into their standard observation procedures, recognizing that her atmospheric analysis provided predictive capabilities that exceeded conventional weather assessment methods. Her mathematical models offered systematic approaches to environmental compensation that could prevent accuracy problems rather than simply reacting to unexplained shooting failures after they occurred. Master Sergeant Kowalski found himself requesting copies of Elena's ballistic calculation procedures, his decades of conventional training experience, providing sufficient background to recognize the sophisticated mathematical frameworks that underpinned her alternative shooting methods. Her systematic approach to environmental compensation represented knowledge that could enhance conventional training programs if properly integrated into standard military procedures. Staff Sergeant Torres studied Elena's modified equipment with the analytical attention of someone attempting to understand technical innovations that addressed ballistic problems through engineering solutions, rather than enhanced application of traditional techniques. Her sight system incorporated optical principles that could benefit conventional shooters, facing similar environmental challenges in combat situations where standard iron sight methods might prove inadequate. Lieutenant Shun recognized Elena's mathematical models as applications of advanced physics principles that military research programs had explored theoretically but never implemented practically. Her ballistic calculations incorporated atmospheric variables that conventional training rarely addressed, yet their accuracy had been validated through empirical results that demonstrated the practical value of systematic environmental analysis. Competition officials began documenting Elena's teaching methods as potential additions to standard marksmanship training curricula, recognizing that her systematic approach to environmental compensation could prevent accuracy problems that conventional techniques couldn't adequately address. Her mathematical frameworks provided predictive capabilities that could enhance military shooting programs if institutional policies could accommodate unconventional methodologies. Elena's coaching sessions revealed the depth of preparation required to implement her alternative methods effectively. Months of atmospheric study and ballistic testing that had identified environmental patterns conventional training didn't anticipate. Her mathematical models required understanding of physics principles that exceeded standard military technical education, but their practical applications could be taught to shooters willing to expand beyond traditional techniques. The regional competition concluded with unprecedented results as Elena's coaching enabled elite marksmen to achieve accuracy levels that exceeded their morning performances despite environmental conditions that had threatened to compromise the entire event. Her mathematical compensation methods had proven capable of overcoming atmospheric challenges that conventional techniques couldn't handle, validating alternative approaches that challenged institutional assumptions about marksmanship excellence. Colonel Mitchell authorized comprehensive documentation of Elena's methods for review by higher military authorities, recognizing that her technical innovations represented potential advances in military training that warranted serious institutional consideration. Her environmental analysis capabilities exceeded standard military meteorological services, while her ballistic compensation procedures offered systematic solutions to problems that conventional training addressed inadequately. Major Sanderson recommended Elena for advanced technical assignments that would utilize her mathematical expertise in developing enhanced training programs for military marksmanship instruction. Her systematic approach to environmental analysis could benefit multiple military specialties beyond basic shooting training, particularly those requiring precision performance under challenging atmospheric conditions. Master Sergeant Kowalski requested permission to implement Elena's environmental monitoring techniques as standard procedures for future competitions, acknowledging that her predictive capabilities could prevent accuracy crises that threatened the integrity of military marksmanship events. Her mathematical models provided early warning systems for atmospheric conditions that exceeded conventional compensation capabilities. The cultural transformation extended beyond immediate competition results to encompass recognition that Elena's unconventional methods represented legitimate advances in marksmanship science rather than elaborate compensations for individual limitations. Her systematic approach had proven superior to traditional techniques under challenging conditions, validating alternative methodologies that institutional attitudes had previously dismissed as unnecessary complexity. Elena's modified equipment became subjects of intense technical interest among military research personnel, who recognized that her engineering solutions addressed ballistic problems through innovative applications of established scientific principles. Her sight system incorporated optical technologies that could enhance conventional military rifle systems if procurement policies could accommodate non-standard equipment configurations. The implications extended far beyond individual shooting performance to encompass questions about institutional flexibility and the military's capacity to recognize technical innovations that challenged established procedures while delivering superior results under demanding operational conditions. 6 months later, Elena stood before an amphitheater filled with marksmanship instructors from 17 military installations across North America. Her modified rifle system displayed on the demonstration table where once her unconventional equipment had been dismissed as elaborate compensation for individual limitations. The Advanced Environmental Marksmanship Training Center at Fort Braxton had been established specifically to implement the systematic ballistic analysis methods that her unauthorized competition demonstration had proven superior to conventional techniques under challenging atmospheric conditions. Colonel Mitchell introduced Elena to the assembled instructors with recognition that reflected the institutional transformation her technical innovations had initiated throughout military marksmanship training programs. Her environmental analysis methods had been incorporated into standard operating procedures for precision shooting competitions. Her mathematical compensation techniques had become required curriculum for advanced sniper training, and her equipment modifications had influenced procurement decisions that prioritized adaptability over standardization in specialized shooting applications. The audience included Master Sergeant Kowalski, who now served as Elena's primary assistant instructor after months of intensive training in atmospheric analysis and ballistic calculation procedures that had fundamentally changed his approach to marksmanship education. His conversion from skeptical traditionalist to enthusiastic advocate for mathematical shooting methods exemplified the cultural transformation that Elena's demonstration had catalyzed throughout the military's precision shooting community. Staff Sergeant Torres occupied a front row seat, his notebook filled with detailed diagrams of Elena's sight system modifications and calculation procedures that he'd been implementing at his home installation with remarkable success. His combat experience provided practical validation for environmental compensation. methods that proved essential for maintaining accuracy under field conditions that exceeded the parameters covered by conventional training programs. Lieutenant Chun had been reassigned to Fort Braxton's Research and Development Division, where her engineering background complemented Elena's mathematical expertise in developing standardized versions of alternative shooting systems that could be mass-produced for military distribution. Their collaboration represented institutional recognition that unconventional methods warranted serious research investment rather than dismissal as individual adaptations to physical limitations. Elena's presentation began with meteorological analysis that demonstrated the predictive capabilities her mathematical models had achieved through systematic atmospheric study that conventional weather forecasting services rarely attempted. Her environmental monitoring techniques had identified patterns in thermal current formation, humidity variation cycles, and barometric pressure fluctuations that could be predicted days in advance with accuracy that exceeded standard military meteorological capabilities. The ballistic calculation procedures she developed incorporated atmospheric variables that conventional training rarely addressed, yet their practical applications had proven essential for maintaining precision under environmental conditions that standard compensation methods couldn't adequately handle. Her mathematical frameworks provided systematic approaches to problems that traditional marksmanship training addressed through experience and intuition rather than scientific analysis. Elena's equipment demonstration revealed the engineering principles that underpinned her alternative sight system, optical modifications that addressed environmental distortions affecting conventional iron sight shooting while maintaining compatibility with standard military rifle platforms. Her technical innovations represented solutions to ballistic problems rather than compensations for individual limitations, engineering advances that could benefit any shooter facing challenging atmospheric conditions. The training curriculum. Elena had developed combined theoretical instruction in atmospheric physics with practical applications that taught mathematical compensation techniques to instructors who'd built their careers on conventional shooting methods. Her systematic approach required understanding of scientific principles that exceeded standard military technical education, but the practical benefits justified the additional complexity for situations where traditional techniques proved inadequate. Major Sanderson, now director of the Environmental Marksmanship Training Center, provided administrative oversight for programs that had expanded beyond basic shooting instruction to encompass comprehensive atmospheric analysis training for military personnel, whose duties required precision performance under challenging environmental conditions. Elena's methods had applications that extended far beyond marksmanship to include artillery, targeting, drone operation, and optical surveillance systems that faced similar atmospheric interference challenges. The morning session concluded with practical shooting demonstrations, where Elena coached volunteer instructors through mathematical compensation procedures that enabled accurate target engagement despite artificially generated environmental disturbances that simulated combat conditions. Her teaching methods proved effective for traditional marksmen willing to expand their technical knowledge beyond conventional techniques, though institutional implementation required ongoing support for instructors adapting to systematic approaches that differed significantly from intuitive shooting methods. Staff Sergeant Michael Harrison, the former Army individual champion who'd struggled during Elena's initial competition demonstration, now served as a regional advocate for environmental analysis training after experiencing firsthand how mathematical compensation methods could overcome atmospheric challenges that traditional techniques couldn't address. His conversion from skeptical competitor to enthusiastic supporter provided credibility for alternative approaches among elite marksmen who might otherwise resist unconventional training methods. Gunnery Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez had incorporated Elena's ballistic calculation procedures into her unit's standard training protocols, achieving measurable improvements in shooting performance under adverse conditions that validated systematic environmental analysis as essential rather than optional for military precision shooting applications. Her documentation of training results provided empirical evidence for institutional policies that now required environmental compensation. Instruction for advanced marksmanship programs. Technical Sergeant David Kim had been selected for specialized assignments that utilized his newly acquired expertise in mathematical shooting methods, his technical background providing foundation for advanced applications of Elena's atmospheric analysis techniques and research programs developing next-generation precision shooting systems. His career trajectory exemplified institutional recognition that alternative methods warranted professional development investment rather than career limitation. Elena's afternoon presentation addressed implementation challenges that accompanied institutional adoption of unconventional training methods, administrative hurdles that required policy modifications to accommodate systematic approaches that differed from established military procedures. Her recommendations emphasized gradual integration rather than complete replacement of traditional techniques, recognizing that conventional methods retained value for situations where environmental conditions fell within normal parameters. The cultural transformation extended beyond technical training to encompass fundamental changes in institutional attitudes toward innovation and adaptability in military education programs. Elena's success had demonstrated that individual initiatives could identify solutions to problems that conventional wisdom hadn't anticipated, encouraging experimental approaches that complemented rather than replaced established procedures. Range safety protocols had been modified to accommodate alternative equipment configurations that exceeded standard military specifications while maintaining operational safety standards appropriate for precision shooting training. Elena's systematic approach to equipment modification provided frameworks for evaluating unconventional innovations that address specific operational requirements without compromising institutional quality control procedures. Competition regulations had been updated to permit mathematical aids and environmental monitoring equipment that enhanced rather than replaced fundamental shooting skills, recognizing that technological assistance could improve performance under challenging conditions without undermining the essential human capabilities that defined marksmanship excellence. Elena's influence on policy development reflected institutional acknowledgement that rigid standardization could limit effectiveness under circumstances that required adaptive solutions. The training center's first graduating class included instructors from specialized military units whose operational requirements demanded precision performance under environmental conditions that exceeded conventional training parameters. Elena's methods had proven essential for mountain warfare specialists, desert operations personnel, and maritime precision shooting teams, whose missions involved atmospheric challenges that traditional techniques couldn't adequately address. Elena's office displayed letters of appreciation from military units worldwide that had implemented her environmental analysis techniques with measurable improvements in operational effectiveness. Her mathematical frameworks had been translated into multiple languages and adapted for diverse climatic conditions, demonstrating universal applications for systematic approaches to atmospheric compensation in precision shooting applications. The Advanced Environmental Marksmanship Training Center represented institutional commitment to research and development programs that explored innovative solutions to ballistic problems through scientific analysis rather than traditional approaches alone. Elena's directorship of the center reflected recognition that her technical expertise warranted leadership responsibilities in developing future military training programs. Her modified rifle system had been displayed in the center's museum alongside historical examples of marksmanship innovation. Institutional acknowledgement that her alternative methods represented legitimate advances in shooting science rather than individual accommodations for physical limitations. The exhibit included documentation of her mathematical models and environmental analysis techniques, preserving knowledge that had transformed military approaches to precision shooting training under challenging atmospheric conditions. Elena's transformation from dismissed outsider to institutional leader exemplified the military's capacity for recognizing and incorporating technical innovations that challenged established procedures while delivering superior operational results. Elena's story reached its ultimate vindication when the Department of Defense officially adopted her environmental compensation shooting system as standard equipment for all elite military units operating in challenging atmospheric conditions. The woman once mocked for her iron sights impaired limitation had revolutionized an entire field through mathematical precision and unwavering determination. Her techniques now protect soldiers worldwide, from Arctic snipers compensating for extreme cold distortions to desert marksmen battling thermal mirages that conventional training never addressed. Military academies teach the Vasquez Method as required curriculum, and her modified sight systems have saved countless lives in combat zones where atmospheric challenges make traditional shooting impossible. The final irony came when those same elite marksmen who had laughed at her unconventional approach began seeking her personal training. Staff Sergeant Harrison, Master Sergeant Kowalski, and dozens of others who had dismissed her methods now proudly display certificates from Elena's Advanced Environmental Marksmanship program. Elena's legacy proved that being different isn't a weakness, it's often the key to solving problems that normal approaches can't handle. Her mathematical mind, once seen as overthinking, became the foundation for innovations that transformed military precision shooting forever. Today, when young soldiers struggle with unconventional approaches or feel dismissed for thinking differently, instructors share Elena's story as proof that the quiet ones, the methodical ones, the ones who prepare while others improvise, often hold the keys to breakthrough innovations. Elena Vasquez didn't just outshoot 20 elite marksmen, she redefined what marksmanship excellence could become. If stories like Elena's inspire you, tales of underdogs who transform entire fields through determination and unconventional thinking, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our community of dreamers and achievers. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that being different is actually being extraordinary. What's your Elena Vasquez moment? Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. New inspiring stories drop every Tuesday and Friday. Don't miss them.